So that's when I left. I hitchhiked back to Boston, and I went to stay with my grandmother in Allston for a little while. This was 71, the end of the summer, I think it was. And, well, actually, before then in Reading, when I was in the drug rehab place, I went to, there was a gay bar called the Green. So obviously by this time, I had also done something with my roommate, Mark. I used to watch him when he slept. So this is when I started realizing that there's no turning back, that this is the way I am, and it's I don't know how I don't think it was gay then. This was right before or around Stonewall.
Right.
So I don't know what you would call homosexual. It was still very clinical.
Yeah.
But there was a gay bar there called the Green Door or the Glass Door in Reading that I found, because even though the hippies were more open, it was still little jokes like, what does a hip fag say? Can I have a hit off your joint? So this is the
there was a lot of homophobia in
the hippies were much more open and loving and stuff, but there was still that kind of thing, and I was a hippie.
Right.
So I was hanging around outside. There was like 14, and I got picked up. Well, actually, before then, I used to get blowjobs hitchhiking from my mother's house. They would never drive us anywhere, and it was like 10 miles to my girlfriend's house in the country. So I used to hitchhike there all the time, and I'd get picked up by guys who would blow me.
Right.
Which I didn't really like, but it felt a little good. But you know, the guys, they weren't my type or anything, so it was easy to just disconnect it. But then I had this Asian guy picked me up, and we went to a hotel room, and it was awful, and he had all this perfume and cologne on that really disgusted me, which to this day, if I would ever go, not that I go with anybody anymore, but if I would, they'd go in the shower if they had any kind of smelly deodorant or anything. So that was my first, this is when I had realized and accepted the fact that this is the way it was going to be, but I still wasn't open about it. I still didn't admit it to anybody. It was never spoken about until I went back to Boston. I hitchhiked back to Boston. I lived in Allston with my grandmother for a little while, and I used to go into Harvard Square, and there was a bookstore there that had a homosexual section or something. Well, it was probably one rack, one of those, one little thing. But there was like Querelle. I was so scared to go up and pay for these books. I hovered around for at least a half an hour not even with the books, just like, do I want to go up there with this? It was so dirty.
What was the name of the bookstore?
It's gone now. It was there for many years. It was in Harvard Square. It was
it's okay.
across from that cinema.
From the Orson Welles?
No, that was down on Mass.
Oh, on Church Street, you mean?
I don't know. It was the old stuff. They played old movies there.
Oh, Rattle.
Yeah. Right across from there was the bookstore.
Yeah.
And I spent a lot of time in there because I was in the closet and everything. So, but I finally got. Oh, I know what it was. John Ritchie read the murder one where they cut off the guy's dick and stuff. I think it was at the end. What the hell was the name of that? So that was really erotic but scary.
Right.
But then I also got Querelle, which was really exciting.
Right.
And kind of formed a lot of my sexuality later in life. So I got the books, and I felt filthy, dirty, rotten, but they didn't even bat an eyelash when I went out and paid for it, which I was shocked.
Yeah.
And then I snuck them home to my grandmother's house, and I hid them and I read them. And then I found a free school. In those days, the hippies, it was where you would go in and there was no organization. You would go to whatever class you wanted to and stuff like that. So, because I never did good in school because I was always fighting with the teachers and tripping and sleeping and stuff. So I went there and I met my best friend, Geraldine. Geraldine was a year older than me. She was very very intelligent. She knew a lot of things. She was very hip with Andy Warhol and stuff like that. And I had lived in the country for 5 years, so I was pretty backwards at this time. I knew the hippie stuff, but I didn't know any of the cultural stuff. I didn't know any of the gay stuff. I didn't know any of the fashion. She was into all of that stuff. She was a slob, but she would dress really nice, but she'd have stains and stuff like that. And that's where I came in later, of course. And she was very open, and she was the first person, I think she asked me if I was gay. And I finally admitted that I was to Geraldine, and then to everybody there. And then the next thing I know, I was wearing a little hot orange gay button. And I decided I was going to go to something gay. And what I found was, I don't know if the Mattachine Society still had something going on here at the time, but I know I went to the Gay Alliance, or Gay...
the Gay Liberation
Gay Liberation Front, or the Gay Liberation Alliance, or one of those things.
Right.
And then I went there, and I was 15, and of course I got a lot of attention for the first time in my life, because everybody wanted boys.
Right.
But I was at a meeting there, and then they had a dance, and I went to the dance, and it was kind of weird because it was like everybody had on like white shirts, and in those days, they wanted you to dress straight, so that you could blend in, so that if you protested, they wouldn't beat you up and stuff, supposedly. But I was a hippie, so I wasn't really into that stuff. It was too square for me. And I think I also went to a Mattachine dance. But at one of the meetings at the Gay Alliance, the Gay Liberation Front, some of the guys went to Sporters afterwards, and they took me. So this was my first gay bar I walked into. And of course I got some attention, and I had very long hair and stuff, and most everybody at Sporters at that time had short hair or the mustache and a little bit long hair.
And this would have been 1971.
71, yeah. The dance actually was right near Sporters. It was, and the meetings were right over there too somewhere. So I went to Sporters, and then after Sporters, I used to hitchhike everywhere. So I think somebody was giving me a ride to Mass Ave or something, but they had to make a stop, and they pulled up in front of the other side. We had just come from Sporters, which was loud but very YMCA-ish, before YMCA, before the Village People.
Right.
And then I'm sitting in front of the fucking other side, and I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? These wild drag queens are screaming and running in and laughing, and all these really cute guys, and platforms, which had just come out. Platforms and small baggies, and everybody's all fashionable. Then you got people that are already high and shit.
But this is what you saw before you even went inside.
This is sitting in the car.
Okay.
I was 15 years old, so they didn't even think of taking me in, which didn't mean anything.
Right.
About 15 minutes I sat out there, and I just kind of hid a little bit, but also was really checking everything out and watching everything, and I decided I was going to come back here. This was a place that I was going to come back. So,
what was it, just the glamour of it that made you want to come back, or I mean, was it just what was it? That
it had a feel. The Sporters didn't have a feel of community, even though a lot of people said that it did. It didn't have the other side. It was for the misfits. It was a place where you could be safe. I mean, Sporters was kind of like that too, but it was much more accepted because everybody looked like they were straight and stuff. So it was kind of. But the other side had the misfits. The other side had the drag queens. The other side had the underage kids like me who were hustling and stuff like that. They had the pimps. They had the whores. They had the tricks. A couple of lesbians here and there across the street at Jocks were all the gay girls.
Right.
And the drag queens picking up the tricks. But that happened inside the other side too.
So Jocks was known as more of a women's bar for a long time?
It was lesbian.
Before it became just a
My
drag.
aunt used to hang out over there with Sophie, and they'd come visit me over at later over there. It was lesbian. The gays didn't really hang out there. You could.
Right.
Nobody was going to kick you out, but it was women.
Okay.
And you got to remember, in those days, women were very radical, were very feminist, and they didn't want boys around. So we were more welcoming in the gay clubs, but the lesbian clubs, they weren't so welcoming.
Right.
Not that they would do anything.
Right.
So I saw this. I went home that night. I didn't have sex with anybody yet, I don't think. Real sex, before then I'd gotten blowjobs, that's it. And within a couple of days, I went back to the other side. I stood around outside for a while. I was scared shitless. I was still a little hippie. And everybody else, mostly everybody, not everybody, there were still hippies and stuff, but mostly everybody else at that time were already into the glam rock glitter stuff. The platforms were starting, low platforms, but and the queens were all very much into the 40s and the 30s. It was all about, at that time, a lot of things were about
recreating old Hollywood kind
retro
of
stuff. It was all about Hollywood. It was all about old Hollywood and recreating glamour and stuff like that. But of course we had no money, so they would have to make do with whatever they had. So the queens would make costumes out of anything, which is why Sylvia would come up with all these crazy things, because this is what we did. We were all street kids.
And this is Sylvia Sidney, just so
Sylvia Sidney, Monday nights. Right. So anyway, I go back. I'm outside, and I think somebody, Paul Walsh, who I can't find, I think was the first person I met there, and he was like, I was cute. So of course I was new meat. But Paul was very friendly, and I think I kind of went in with him, and John was at the door, and he just said something. Oh, I think Paul said, "This is my boyfriend," and he kind of, and I'm like, but he's like, "This is my boyfriend" and stuff, and so they just let me through.
Did you ever feel any? Did you have any awareness that you were new meat? Like, did you feel any sort of sense of like?
Not right away.
Okay.
I didn't realize it until I started learning the politics. I just was glad, as a boy, my mother would have these weekend parties, and the guys would pass out in our beds, and I'd wake up, and there'd be a half-naked man sleeping there, and I would lay my head on his chest. It wasn't anything sexual, but it was about strength, and I always wanted a big brother.
Right.
So, why did I stop this?
Well, I was asking if you had any sense of, like when you first got there, that you were, desirable, or that you were considered new meat, or that, it sort of became, or did the awareness dawned on you later? Or?
I was very insecure. I was very young. I was skinny. I had a sunken-in chest because I was so... When I was a young boy, I was so insecure and so fearful and so everything. I would walk like this, and I would walk with my head down, and I had a sunken-in chest. It's still kind of there a little bit. But it was really sunken in. I took ballet later, which took care of all that stuff. So I was kind of insecure. I was very insecure, and I was scared. So I didn't think, and I had pimples. So I didn't think I was beautiful. And I was always told I was an asshole and I was a piece of shit. Nothing I had to say was important or anything like that. So 15 years old, all I knew is that I was free. And that I was, when I walked into this place, it was kind of early still because I didn't know. And we walked into the PB pub, and you walked in through usually you'd walk in through the PB pub, which had booths, and then it had a bar, and it was dark, of course. And you walked through, and there was a sign that said the other side discotheque, QUE, which was very new then. But then the door on the left was locked until 9:30 or 10, and I was probably there at like 8 or something.
So the PB pub was where people hung out before the other side opened.
That's why I would hang out there with Dan Golden and the Queens eventually, before it opened. And then after, we'd go back and forth too if you wanted some quiet and stuff a little bit to get away from the other side, or if you were ready to pass out from too many Tuinals or something.
Any personalities at the PB pub that you remember, like the bartender or anything like that?
I never knew any of the bartenders because I didn't drink. Because I knew if I took a drink from anybody, I was beholden. People would buy you a drink, but they would expect you to whatever. Right. And I learned quickly about that. So that I learned really fast.
Right.
No, PB Pub, I never spent much time in PB Pub. It was just a walkthrough, basically. There were some older clientele there. There was also this really upper-class restaurant, gay restaurant, the 90s, the 99s or the 90s it was called, right next to the other side that was connected to it, which I never walked into because it was very up. It was like Napoleon crowd would go in there.